Welcome back. We're ready to move on to the first panel of the day, Positive Energy, Powering Canada's Economic Recovery. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone this panel has a live Q&A component in Whova following the opening comments. And now I'd like to pass the virtual podium on to this session's sponsor, Petronas, to introduce our moderator.
Good morning, and thank you for joining today's discussion on the role that BC's energy sector will play as Canada and the world seek to recover from the impacts of the global pandemic. My name is Shannon Young, and I'm the Director of External Affairs at Petronas Canada. While we all wish we were able to meet in person, on behalf of Petronas Canada, I would like to thank Sarah Weber and her advisory committee and C3 Alliance for creating this terrific platform that enables all of us to continue this meaningful collaboration and exchange of ideas. I'd like to acknowledge that Petronas Canada's operations are located in the traditional territories of the Treaty 8 nations, the land of the Deneta and the Cree. Petronas has been a sponsor of the BC Natural Resources Forum for more than 6 years, and we're excited to be the panel sponsor for this important dialogue on powering Canada's economic recovery. This discussion aligns with our strong belief that the energy sector in British Columbia, in collaboration with the BC government, Indigenous peoples, and local stakeholders, has a critical role to play as a driver of economic recovery and as a global leader in emission reductions and clean, sustainable growth. For those of you not familiar with Petronas Canada, we hold a significant land position in the North Montney in Northeast BC and are a joint venture partner in LNG Canada. Petronas is committed to responsibly producing natural gas from that resource-rich area in a manner that incorporates climate change solutions and leads towards a sustainable energy future for generations to come. With that context, I look forward to the panel discussion and will now hand the program over to our session moderator, Bryan Cox. Bryan is the President and CEO of the Canadian LNG Alliance. Thank you and enjoy the session.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Positive Energy panel. I love the title of this panel because that's really what it's all about, and I think what you're hearing really here at this conference. My name is Bryan Cox, and I'm the President and CEO of the Canadian LNG Alliance. I'm speaking to you today from the community of Cloverdale and the city of Surrey on the traditional territories of the Katzie, Kwantlen, and Semiahmoo peoples. Very, very pleased to be joining you today with an incredible panel of experts that are pan-Canadian and global in vision. And I think this is the real opportunity of this panel to talk about what we're doing now and what we can continue to do and grow into as a province and as a country when it comes to energy leadership. It's bigger than all of us. It's bigger than BC. We're in uncertain times. When it seems to be getting easier to define ourselves by who and what we're not, rather than who and what we are. We're in incredibly polarized dialogues, no matter where you turn, and especially when it comes to energy and natural resources. I think what you've heard at this conference over the past few days is exceptional. And kudos to C3 and the team for putting on this online conference in such an unusual time for all of us. But to be able to hear the synergies that have come through, regardless of the sector, regardless of the dialogue on what British Columbia and Canada's opportunity is when it comes to natural resources, has been exceptional. You look at the voices that you've heard from, generational voices, strong female leaders, Indigenous leaders, younger folks that are engaged in this industry. There's a bright future for it. We've heard from industry leaders, political leaders, Indigenous leaders. We've heard about really excellent things like economic recovery plus. I really loved that from Alexa Young in one of the panels. You saw Sharon Singh with that excellent moderation yesterday. We've got so much to offer. And you just saw my colleague Kaylee Murphy previous to this. This is fantastic stuff we got to do here, but we got to see it through. I spoke last year about a yes and conversation, and I think many of you know about that, but I'll mention it again. because yes and is a comedic principle about improv and about keeping your mind open in order to get to great things. We're having too many no because conversations, and it's time for more yes and conversations. It's going to take all of the solutions, all of the industries that you've heard from and will continue to hear from over the next bit of the event that we're having. So we need to keep our minds open and have that yes and conversation. So I think about this panel and what we have to offer. There's no more opportunity in the innovation, prosperity, climate solutions side than our natural gas value chain and our energy industry more broadly. As Kim mentioned before, in Canada, we have a strong, robust regulatory system. Our upstream industry and our LNG projects, governments, Indigenous communities have engaged in years of work leading to groundbreaking partnerships. And our entire value chain is leading the way on innovations and solutions to reduce emissions even further. You heard Kim talk about LNG Canada being the lowest emission LNG facility in the world when it comes into operation. Look at the news over the past few days even. The world is quickly coming to the realization that emissions intensity matters when it comes to LNG. And Canada is perfectly positioned. Other countries are now just starting to talk about it. But guess what? We've been taking action for years and years and years. We have the lowest emission LNG project being built. We have more to follow when you think of Woodpot Fiber, Fortis's Tilbury facility, when you think about Cedar LNG, and there's more. This is an incredible opportunity. Kim talked about the Conference Board of Canada report. Just to unpack that a little bit more before we get into the panel. But 71,000 jobs a year could be created here in British Columbia. What that report does differently than most other reports is it talks about each sector that benefits. So it does not matter what sector you're in, you have skin in the game when we build big things, when we build big infrastructure projects, when we do things the right way. Accommodation and food services, retail, manufacturing all grow when we grow the economy. So this is an incredible opportunity. A second report that the Conference Board of Canada did back in November was around the benefits that Indigenous communities are seeing from the development of this industry. A very powerful report showing that Indigenous communities are engaging on the terms that they want to engage in and seeing the benefits that they want to see. And you heard that come through the panels. So it's time for us to lean in, get these projects built, get more connectivity through our natural gas value chain, our energy industry, and really come to the place where we can be as a country, as an energy leader for the world. So now it's time to introduce the panel and get into it and hear from these leaders. And I tell you, we've got a great panel here today. So we've got four incredible individuals, and I'll just briefly introduce them by the speaking order. First one is Gitane de Silva, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Canada's Energy Regulator. So an ability for Gitane to really talk about the regulatory environment in Canada and what we can do to continue to innovate within it and ensure that we can get projects to realization. An incredible background Gitane has both in the industry and the foreign service and within government itself, bring a really broad global perspective to us today. Our next panelist is Mike Rose, who's the president and CEO of Tourmaline. And Mike is someone who's built this industry up. He's created companies. He's hired people from all over. He's taken the risks that we see people take within these industries to actually get things done. So Mike has done it. He's seen it, and he sees the opportunity moving forward. And I think you'll hear some great things from him. Our next speaker is Donna Phillips, who's the executive vice president of Pacific Canbriam Energy. And I think you'll hear some amazing things from Donna, who's a real leader on the policy side, on the ESG side, and what our opportunity is in the natural gas value chain in British Columbia and Canada. And finally, I'm really excited to have Tim Egan on this panel, who's the president and CEO of the Canadian Gas Association. Tim is a real leader within the industry, one of the best advocates we have, and in fact has played an incredible leadership role during this COVID period of working with all of his peers, including me, in engaging with government and having dialogue during this uncertain times that we have across the value chain in the industry. Tim was able to speak about the natural gas distribution network, all of the innovations that are happening within it, and how we can do more. So without further ado, I will pass it off to Gitane to lead us off on the panel, and then we're going to engage in some great dialogue. Really looking forward to your questions and to really getting the discussion going. Thanks so much. Gitane.
Well, thanks so much for that kind introduction, Bryan, and thanks for bringing together this exceptional panel. I'm really excited to be taking part in this conference virtually this year. It's an honor to be here on behalf of the Canada Energy Regulator. Bonjour tout le monde, c'est un honneur d'être ici parmi vous au nom de la Régie de l'énergie du Canada. The CER regulates infrastructure to ensure the safe and efficient delivery of energy to Canada and to the world. And we do so while protecting the environment, recognizing and respecting the rights of the Indigenous peoples of Canada, and providing timely and relevant energy information and analysis. On behalf of my fellow panelists, I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations, and the City of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. Thank you for joining us from wherever you are, and I'd like to honor each of you on your traditional territories as we come together from across the country. So today I want to bring some perspectives about powering Canada's economic recovery from the perspective of Canada's National Energy Regulator of pipelines, international transmission lines, and energy exports. But first I want to touch on the importance of BC to Canada's economic and energy recovery. So as Kim Cody mentioned in her previous comments, the CER publishes an annual energy outlook called Canada's Energy Future, and this was released in November of last year. For those who haven't seen it, I encourage you to visit our website and take a look. This report includes two future energy scenarios, an evolving scenario, which considers the impact of continued technological innovation and global action on climate change, and a reference scenario, which considers a future where technologies in action to reduce GHG emissions do not develop much beyond current measures in place. Under both scenarios, BC continues to have strong natural gas production growth and will in fact become the largest natural gas producer in Canada by 2040. Our projections see BC natural gas production being driven by liquids production as well as LNG export assumptions. So BC natural gas is extremely important to Canada's economic and energy recovery, and it will only increase in importance over the next 30 years. Now, as the CEO of Canada's Energy Regulator, I've come to know that the public debate on pipelines in Canada is complicated. And in order to be effective, our regulator needs to be trusted. We need to provide a roadmap that lays out what Canadians can expect from us in the coming years. This roadmap comes directly from the legislation that established the CER, the Canadian Energy Regulator Act. I'd like to highlight two of the CER's priorities that focus on powering Canada's economic recovery, the first of which is competitiveness. The Act states that Canada's global competitiveness will be enhanced, and this is particularly urgent in 2021 as the entire energy industry has been facing strong headwinds from the combination of the global pandemic and the OPEC plus price war. As we look towards economic recovery, we know that the companies that are going to thrive will be those with the ability to innovate and adapt to the global transition to the low carbon economy. The CER is working to enhance Canada's global competitiveness by making decisions in a predictable and timely way and working to provide certainty to investors and stakeholders. We are also engaging in conversations with stakeholders about the role of the regulator in the recovery and in ESG. The second priority I want to speak about is reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. The CER Act clearly states that the government is committed to achieving reconciliation with First Nations, the Métis and Inuit. And today, the CER is transforming the way it works with Indigenous peoples with a commitment to implementing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We will do this by enhancing the involvement of Indigenous peoples in how we discharge our mandate, recognizing their unique cultures, knowledge, and histories, building renewed relationships based on the recognition of rights and respect, and driving meaningful change in the CER's requirements and expectations of regulated industry. And I'm very proud that for the first time ever, Canada's National Energy Regulator has an Indigenous Advisory Committee representing diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis interests. This committee provides strategic advice to our board on how the CER can better build relationships with Indigenous peoples and incorporate Indigenous perspectives into our work. I'm also pleased that our work with the Indigenous Advisory Monitoring Committee for the Trans Mountain expansion highlights how the CER can work differently. Since 2017, Indigenous monitors have participated in over 50 joint inspections, emergency exercises, and other compliance verification activities with the CER. I am very proud of this work. It is progress, and it is a very positive step in our journey towards reconciliation. Reconciliation matters because it is long past due. And it is not just respectful and meaningful relationships. Reconciliation also includes real participation in the projects themselves, including in monitoring and oversight. So with that, I will end my remarks. I look forward to the questions, and I'll pass it back to you, Bryan. Thank you.
Thank you, Gitane, for that excellent overview of the work that you're leading. You're an excellent leader at the right time for this organization. I look forward to getting into the dialogue to unpack some of the important things that you've just said. Now on to Mike Rose, who's President and CEO of Tourmaline. Really looking forward to your comments, Mike, and hearing from you. So over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Bryan. Thanks to the forum for the invite, and I'm honored to be on this panel with all of you. I'll start with just a few quick comments on Tourmaline. Company's 12 and a half years old. We started it during the last financial crisis. We've grown from zero to a Canadian senior producer in that time period. We're the country's largest natural gas producer and the largest natural gas liquid producer, and we build and control our own infrastructure, so we're the 5th largest gas midstreamer. We think Canada's two most competitive and economic gas plays on a North American and really a worldwide scale are the Alberta Deep Basin and the BC Alberta Montney. We're very large in both, and we think the Montney play in BC is just a wonderful asset that the province is blessed with. We've always had a strong financial position. Our debt to cash flow this year is less than 1 times. What that allowed us to do during the pandemic, we were largely able to play through it. We were the busiest operator in Western Canada in 2020. We had no layoffs, and we were employing a lot of service sector employees back in the basin, as we call it, in the smaller towns like Dawson Creek and Fort St. John and Hinton and Edson. A little on our BC activities. We're committed to the long-term, efficient and clean development of BC's natural gas resources. Since 2013, we've invested over $2 billion in the province. Tourmaline's actually the independent oil and gas company that our original core team has created. So over the past 25 years, our total BC investment is closing in on $8 billion. Duvernay Oil Corp, the second of our 3 independents, we sold to Shell Canada in 2008. And Duvernay's Groundbirch asset, ironically, is core of Shell's gas supply for LNG Canada. Looking forward, over the next 5 years, current plans are to invest $2.5 billion in the province of British Columbia. From an environmental performance standpoint, Tourmaline has the lowest net CO2 emissions and the lowest CO2 emission intensity in the Canadian senior sector. But like our whole sector, we're not resting there. We can continue to get better in all aspects of our environmental performance. We achieved a 46% reduction between 13 and 18 on CO2 emission intensity, and going forward, like many of our peers, we've set hard targets to further reduce our CO2 intensity, our methane emissions. Our goal is a 25% further reduction over those next 5 years. As a company, we've selected a few specific areas to develop our own technology. One is in the area of diesel displacement. Another, and we think we're industry leaders in this, is the elimination of fresh water in our fracking operations. What diesel displacement is about is replacing diesel in all of our ultimately drilling and completion operations with much lower emission natural gas. It generates a meaningful CO2 reduction and as well as associated compounds that are created when you burn diesel, but also reduces our costs after we pay out our capital investment. So shareholders get a double win. They get a net cleaner methane molecule and they get a more profitable company. But a big win comes from broadening out some of these initiatives, which we're very keen on. If you think about it, if industry collectively got all the drilling rigs and portions of the completions operations off diesel and onto natural gas, there's an enormous emissions reduction opportunity win for BC and really all of Canada. And we've quantified that, and we're going to work hard to try and make that happen. You don't have to do everything on your own. There's numerous opportunities to corroborate with industry in developing new technology to improve our environmental performance. Natural Gas Innovation Fund is one of those. We're a big proponent of that. I know Tim will talk about it. So suffice to say, the goal is to produce a net cleaner methane molecule from drill bit all the way to burner tip. And Tim will tell you more about that, I'm sure. As we look forward on a macro basis at the world's energy requirements and energy choices, no doubt, and we all know this, the world needs more of all forms of energy. We need more renewables, we need more fossil fuels, we need nuclear, we need it all. In any worldwide demand projection that you look at, even those with the most aggressive renewables build out, natural gas is the largest component of the energy stack for several decades to come. It's also the most affordable in that energy stack. For Canada, with its ever cleaner methane molecules, we should be providing as much of the world's growing nat gas requirements as possible. And really, it's another one of those double wins. The world gets a cleaner global atmosphere as a result, and Canada gets a much stronger economy. And I'll close with just a few comments on economic recovery aspects, which is part of this panel. As our recovery kicks in, as the vaccine slowly ends the pandemic, hopefully really soon. Firstly, the financial situation and the balance sheets of the provinces, our country, and really the world are not great, to say the least. Government subsidies, although certainly necessary, have acted like a bit of a tranquilizer to some extent. But really the only aspect that's mind-numbing is what our revenue and debt lines look like in our collective financial statements. There are some interesting worldwide trends emerging. I think the Biden administration's Buy American initiative may just be a tip of an iceberg. I think countries and their respective economies are going to have to focus on what they are best at, their highest return sectors, if they want to have a shot at a realistic recovery and a hopeful return to pre-pandemic financial health. I think we're looking at a more protectionist world and a little bit of every country for itself. For BC, for Canada, I believe it's about taking advantage of our resource sector. We are the most efficient and environmentally responsible resource developers in the world. That's not just oil and gas. That's mining, forestry, agriculture, and our ability to continue to innovate. So this is the time to take advantage of our core strengths. It's about using what's between our ears to get even better at developing what's at our feet. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Those were just excellent comments, and I think all of you who are listening right now can see, leaders like Mike in this field. This is the future, and I think the things that we just heard about what you're doing at Tourmaline to get better, we need to hear more of, and I think we need to talk about that as we get into our dialogue. British Columbians just really aren't, they don't know what's happening in our upstream a lot of the time, and the innovations and wonderful things that are happening and the world-leading processes that we're using is really second to none. So thank you, Mike, for outlining a few of those. And I think it's a great segue into Donna Phillips from Pacific Canbriam, who's a great leader in the industry, and I know we'll have some really, really important comments for us. So Donna, over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Bryan. And also thank you, Gitane, for the land acknowledgement on our behalf. Also, I'd like to thank the BC Natural Resources Forum for the invitation and to be part of this panel. Pacific Canbriam is a natural gas producer in the Montney in Northeast BC. We started the company about 13 years ago, and throughout that life cycle, we recognized the importance of relationships within our operating areas. So I'll just touch on a couple highlights. You've heard some repetition here possibly from what Mike said, and also earlier from Kim Cody. There's some comments around water, but I've prepared some of these remarks, so I will go ahead and highlight those points. First of all, on Indigenous engagement, we've proactively engaged with Indigenous communities within our operating areas and have signed impact benefit agreements or capacity and consultation agreements. This engagement continues on an ongoing basis as the relationships and plans evolve. We recognize the strong connection to the land, and with the guidance of Indigenous communities, have taken steps to mitigate impacts. In addition, we fully support the principles of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. Some of you may be familiar with the term MOOC. It stands for Massive Online Open Course. There's a MOOC called Indigenous Canada at the U of A, which Dan Levy helped to create awareness for this past summer. And there's now over 200,000 people registered for it. At Pacific Canbriam Energy, our whole executive team has committed to taking the course, and I highly recommend it. And with respect to water, we obtained a long-term water license from Wilstone Reservoir and built a water pipeline back in 2010. Our entire field is pipeline connected, taking all the water trucks off the road. In addition to the water trucks, we have eliminated trucking of natural gas liquids through the construction of a natural gas liquids pipeline. Eliminating trucking created several positives in the communities by reducing emissions, improving road safety and quality of life through reduced traffic, noise, and dust management. A couple data points from our water recycling hub. As Mike mentioned earlier, that's a really important part of the environmental story. In 2019, we had 98.6% of the water used for hydraulic fracturing was recycled water, as opposed to fresh water. And in 2020, we used 100% of the water that was used for hydraulic fracturing was recycled water. So as you listen to me speak about our accomplishments, I'm wondering how many of you hear this as a corporate commercial and skeptically discount performance. So rather than companies recounting their own accomplishments, I believe that hearing a supportive voice from others speaks volumes. And this can be achieved by having a third-party verification that supports accomplishments in all areas of environmental, social, and governance. Pacific Canbriam Energy has engaged Equitable Origin, a nonprofit organization that provides a stakeholder-based certification system for the energy industry. This certification incorporates the following areas of assessment: ethics, social, Indigenous, labor, and environment. The BC regulatory regime provides operators in good standing a significant advantage in the certification process due to its world-leading regulatory requirements. BC has an opportunity to be a global leader in ESG, and we can support that with proof points and evidence confirmed by third parties. Thank you, and I look forward to participating in the rest of the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Donna, for those comments. They were fantastic, and I think further show what our opportunity is in Canada. When I think about our LNG opportunity, we often talk about fuel switching, more higher emitting fuels, but our real opportunity as well is that we have the lowest emission LNG, so we will provide that to the market. And I'll tell you, that is our competitive advantage right now with the work that you and Mike and the upstream producers, midstream, our facility proponents, and of course, what's happening within our domestic system as well, what we're doing. We have an incredible story to tell Canadians. And I think about, as I'm speaking to you right now, and I'm enjoying my warm home that's brought to me by my natural gas furnace and all of the benefits that it provides to each of us every day that we don't really think about. And that's, when you think about our export opportunity, that's all we're trying to do is get in a reliable, affordable, responsible energy source to folks in the world that are looking for it. And if we have the best version of it, isn't that the Canadian thing to do? I really think it is, and I know all of you agree, and I hope all of you watching this right now, and I think Tim's presentation and chat will really help bring it home for what we're doing here in Canada, and especially on the innovation side, but just the fact that this fuel provides so much to us every day and will continue to, and we need to give it the credit that it deserves. So Tim, thank you for being here, for speaking today, and over to you.
Thanks, Brian. I think that's what's called a softball, and I very much appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to join the panel. As noted, it's entitled "Powering the Economic Recovery." Of course, I'd rephrase the title. I'd say what we want to do is energize the economic recovery, because I'm not from the power industry. I'm from the gas industry. The Canadian Gas Association represents Canada's gaseous delivery sector. So that's the utilities and the many companies supporting them that deliver gaseous energy to well over 7 million homes and businesses across the country. That includes about 1.25 million homes and businesses in British Columbia through the services of FortisBC and Pacific Northern Gas as distribution companies, and the services of Enbridge and PC Energy as transmission companies. And what role do they play? Well, if you think that an average British Columbian uses 100 units of energy, roughly 30 of those are natural gas delivered to the door by these companies. So that gas is used for home heating needs, as Brian was referencing, for cooking, for hot water, to enable restaurants to serve customers, for commercial building heating, and for all kinds of industrial load. In other words, the energy that industry, including many BC resource companies, needs to stay competitive, to stay in business, and thereby to continue employing British Columbians and to continue providing the tax revenue to service the needs of those British Columbians. The BC member utilities of CGA deliver the most affordable, most reliable energy option for British Columbians, and it's one that can offer a bigger and bigger share of the province's energy mix as time goes on. Now, as we think about coming out of lockdowns and focus on an economic recovery, CGA members are poised to help. We submitted a list of almost 70 projects with a total value of almost $12 billion to the Government of Canada in the spring as shovel-ready projects that could help trigger fast economic returns. Now, these included infrastructure and LNG projects, green retrofit projects, renewable gas projects, and transportation projects. Roughly half of them, or $6 billion worth, are in BC. And these projects offer enormous environmental benefits as well as a real economic boost through improved air quality, lower GHG emissions, and improved efficiency. Those environmental benefits are very real and very important, and several of my colleagues on this panel and on other panels over the course of the conference have emphasized them. And Mike mentioned one in particular that we highlight, which is our Natural Gas Innovation Fund. It's a fund that we set up at the Canadian Gas Association, but has utility and producer engagement from across the country. And these companies are working together, and we're now supporting almost 50 startup companies delivering significant environmental benefits through the innovation they're developing. John Adams, who runs our Natural Gas Innovation Fund, is speaking later today, and he'll explain more of what we're doing in this area. So I'm just going to take the remainder of my time to underscore the economic benefits of natural gas, and particularly to think of them from the perspective of the consumer. I had the opportunity to listen yesterday to the remarks of Chief Charlene Gale of the Fort Nelson First Nation, and I was struck by her emphasis on how resource project development helps address the very real challenge of poverty. As Chief Gale noted, lockdowns are creating more economic hardship for people, not less, and that means more poverty. And to get people out of poverty, they need opportunity. Resource projects deliver that opportunity, as many have noted at the conference, through the jobs and revenue they deliver. But developing resources addresses poverty in another way. Every British Columbian, every Canadian looks at the economic reality we're all facing and wonders what it means personally. Can they pay their bills? Can they get by? Canada's abundant resources have helped to keep life affordable for all Canadians, and that's all the more important as we try to come out of lockdowns. The day-to-day affordability matters more and more. So as we reflect on what we can do to recover quickly, we should remember to stay focused on the people we're trying to help and how we best help them. Those are the Canadian families across BC and the rest of the country who are trying to ensure a decent quality of life, a fair standard of living, that the access to natural gas and other resources has given them. So a final note on this point. I had occasion yesterday to speak to my counterpart in Colombia from the Colombian Gas Association. I represent Canada on the International Gas Union, which is the global association, and I'm in regular contact with my counterparts around the world. And he noted that last year, his industry in Colombia connected 250,000 families to the gas system in that country. And those are families that had no access to energy before that connection. So this delivered those families immediate and substantial benefits, affordable, reliable, clean energy that took them out of energy poverty. Natural gas is doing this all over the world, improving the lives of billions as it continues to improve the lives of Canadians. Canada's energy delivery companies and my association want to ensure that we can continue to deliver those benefits to British Columbians, to Canadians, and to citizens around the world. And we believe we're well positioned to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, for those excellent comments, really grounding what this industry does, what it provides to Canadians, and the economic benefit it provides for our country, across from coast to coast to coast. Now, it's time to get into the dialogue portion of it, and I recognize that we are just before the Premier speaks, so I'm under strict rules here to not go over time, so we won't go over time. So remember, get your questions into the Whova app. If you've got 4 great leaders here to ask questions from who have just incredible expertise and vision for what this energy industry is and can be for this country. But the first question I'd really like to ask is, we've been living this over the last year. I think this conference has been interesting because, we're so used to being in Prince George and hanging out there and all being together. And now we're seeing everyone in their homes, including cabinet ministers. It's a very new dynamic. Here I am in my home, and I know many of you are. So I thought I'd start with a question just around how you and your organizations and your operations have really dealt with COVID, how you've adapted through it, how you've innovated through it, and how you're doing now. So maybe I'll start again with Gitane and go through the same order again. Over to you.
Well, thanks, Bryan. I think it's first important to acknowledge that this is hard, right? Like, as you say, we're all working from home, and fortunately at the CER, our transition to working remotely was pretty seamless. Of course, we still have our field inspectors and operations staff out in the field, ensuring the safety and continuity of our very important energy infrastructure. But my kudos to the organizers for putting this together in this new reality we're all living in. So as I said, our first focus was always on safety of our people and safety of the infrastructure that we regulate. So we've taken a very proactive role in conversations with industry and other orders of government to make sure we have clarity, as every province is dealing with its COVID response differently, to make sure that when we are overseeing a regulated worksite, we understand who actually has the authority when it comes to public health. We're very clear in our expectations of regulated industry in terms of making sure that their people on site and the communities that they interact with are being kept safe, so that they're keeping those COVID protocols in place. We moved to a virtual hearing structure, as many other adjudicators did and tribunals did, and we're having some success there. It's not, of course, the same as actually seeing people face to face, but in a way it's made us as a regulator more accessible, as people don't have to travel to where we are. They can beam into our hearings from their own homes, which we really appreciate people's continued engagement with our processes. And it's also really pushing us forward when it comes to data and digital innovation. We at the regulator are very focused on that, making sure that we're providing accessible, understandable energy information to Canadians so we can contribute to an informed debate and help people make smart choices. And so we've really moved forward on the data visualization side, where people can go to our website and access the data information that they need to be part of these conversations and make these informed decisions. So far so good. I think we all know we'll be in this situation for a while, so we'll continue to evolve as the situation requires. And I think, like many people, we're looking to see what the future of work will look like and how the lessons we've learned in this pandemic can be incorporated into whatever the future of work looks like what parts of this virtual world are actually beneficial in terms of how we can streamline things like our application process, reduce the amount of paper that we need to use, all things like that. So far so good. I look forward to hearing how my colleagues on the panel have adapted to the situation as well.
Thank you, Gitane. Mike, you touched on it a bit in your remarks, but interested in expanding a little further on organizationally and personally too. And personal stories are really, powerful at this time, I think, as well.
Sure. Well, obviously we, followed all the protocols, and in March sent, almost all our staff home from the offices. We had a skeleton crew in here because we actually are a relatively busy operator, so you do need a core group. We brought our office people back systematically beginning in May, and through the summer we had the vast majority of our people back at work. Some new protocols and restrictions evolved in November and December, so we have a portion of our staff at home again, but the majority actually in the office. In the field, obviously protocol changes and making sure everyone's healthy. If you are familiar how a lot of field operations work, they isolate a lot in real life anyway. Well operators drive around by themselves in pickup trucks, so they self-isolate anyway. And so there wasn't a large change in the field. We worked very closely with the contractors we use for our drilling and completions to make sure that all their protocols were in place and consistent with ours. And I'd say that, things ran pretty well on the E&P front. I mentioned corporately that, we were fortunate that we've always kept our debt relatively low. Nobody anticipated this coming. And really for energy companies, there were two crises. There was the pandemic, and then there was the oil price war. But Tourmaline was able to take advantage of some opportunities that presented themselves in 2020. And in the end, as I mentioned, we ended up being the busiest operator in Western Canada because we could financially. And, in the end, we had an extremely strong year corporately. And we continue to follow all the protocols and hope we can get through this and get on to part 2 of the panel, which is economic recovery, really soon.
Thank you, Mike. Great comments. Donna, your thoughts?
Well, obviously, we've done the same things in terms of strict protocols. With respect to our office here in downtown Calgary, we've provided the flexibility to our employees to work from home as much as possible, and in fact, encouraged people to work from home since last March. So we really have had, very few people going into the office. We did try to go back a little bit in October, early October, until the numbers went up again, and we just decided it's just not worth it. We had a very successful year with everyone working from home, and I think there are some challenges for individuals at the home front depending on your situation. However, we were able to manage through that with providing as much flexibility as we could. On the operations side, there was obviously strict protocols, a number of initiatives put into place. We had OGC out, WorkSafe BC came out for audits and inspections, and we passed those just fine. There's just so many ways you can introduce those protocols, and really the primary purpose was the safety of our employees. And, that brings me to the next thought around COVID, moving away from just the protocol piece. I think COVID really provided us an opportunity to squarely put the focus on S in the ESG. And so I see that from my perspective, an opportunity to really understand the importance of the social piece and not just talk about it is safety primarily, but there's so many other aspects of the social part of the ESG lens that we need to look through. And I think that is the area where I'd like to focus on.
Thank you, Donna. And Tim, your thoughts, I think really interesting to hear, not only organizationally, but from your members who provide, that critical services and infrastructure to across the country, how, the leadership role they've all played in keeping our homes hot and our food cooking and all of the things that we need to keep our society going. So over to you, Tim.
Well, I'll give you 2 anecdotes. So the personal one is that, Bryan, like so many of us in the industry, my life usually involved a great deal of travel, and as of March, it's involved very little travel. So on the home front with my wife and I home and all of our children home, the joke in our house was my daughters would scream every morning because there was a stranger in the house who they didn't recognize, and that was their father. So it's been a pleasant change to spend more time with family, but obviously it's been incredibly difficult in lots of other ways. But the industry anecdote I'll share picks up on the point you just made, Bryan, about service. And one of our executives said, I really found this fascinating. He was a VP of operations in one of the distribution utilities, and he said in a meeting we have of operations executives from across the country, which, by the way, we used to have roughly quarterly. We started doing weekly. We started doing them at least twice a month with government as well, to make sure that there was, constant engagement to ensure that the delivery of energy was being maintained. But as he described it, this is our moment to shine, because this is what we do. We can manage through incredibly difficult situations seamlessly and flawlessly. And that's really how the industry reacted to it. We've had pandemic protocols in place for years, so they went into place seamlessly as things were shut down, and the industry has managed to, consistently operate, maintain, and even expand the system through all of this. So lots and lots of difficulties, but I think the delivery industry, and I'm saying this as someone in the gas industry, but equally applicable to the electricity delivery industry. As Canadians, we have an extraordinary level of service in energy delivery, and it's been maintained through all of this.
Thank you, Tim. So, I hear your responses, and I think about the situation we're in and the way you've all adapted, and then I think about innovation. And I look at what all of you have done to innovate thus far and where our industry is. I touched on it before. We're already world leading all of the things that we're doing, and we've done it because it's the way we do business in Canada, and it's something we need to get more front foot on. And I also think that situations like this provide for the opportunity for even more innovation. So I'd be interested in your thoughts around unpacking some of the innovation you've been engaged in already, which you talked about, but what's the opportunity to take it to the next level and really get front foot on that Canadian brand that we are the responsible energy provider of choice. So perhaps I'll start with Mike, then Donna, then Gitane to Tim.
Sure. Well, just building on the emission reduction component of diesel displacement, we've developed some of our own technology to allow us to get the drilling rigs off nat gas. Only part of completion operations. It's a little more complicated, but we're actually working, and there were some announcements yesterday with frac providers so that, we will systematically get more and more of their operation off diesel and onto natural gas. The emission reductions, we can quantify them, and the cost reductions, we can quantify them, but the win comes with getting all of industry to do the same thing. And it is a huge win. And as you mentioned, we're already, producing net the cleanest methane molecules, but none of us are ever going to stand still. As you say, Bryan, it's the Canadian way. But if you expand it one step further, some of the projects within Natural Gas Innovation Fund revolve around CNG and portable small-scale LNG. And so the next step, once we get industry off diesel, is some of these more remote towns, indigenous settlements that rely on diesel. We can get them onto natural gas without having to build the pipeline infrastructure, and then that's yet another win. And the best thing is this is all here right now. Like, this is a big emission reduction opportunity for BC and Alberta, for that matter, and with portable LNG for all of Canada, because a lot of us live in smaller places that are further from infrastructure. And we can get this emission reduction right now and vault Canada even further ahead than the rest of the nations in the world. Like our gas business, in the US, they're just starting in some cases, to address flaring. That's something collectively as an industry. We were working on that 10 years ago, and now, it's almost no gas has ever flared in any of your completion and well operations. And so Canada is ahead, and we need to continue making us further ahead.
Thank you, Mike. Donna.
Well, that was a perfect segue, Mike. Thanks for that. I completely agree. We are way ahead of the game. Our issue is that we just haven't been able to tell our own story properly globally. So I think the area that we can focus on, it's innovation, not necessarily technological innovation, but that we have been a leader in a number of the environmental areas, the social areas. And for BC, I think there is a real opportunity to get out there and tell the world about the BC brand. And I think one way that we need to do that is, and you'll have seen, for those of you that read Larry Fink's from BlackRock, his letter yesterday, he's really calling for a discussion around data and all the metrics that are out there in the different alphabet soup of organizations. He's calling for an alignment of those standards. And I think what we really need is a global standard where we can actually measure BC against the rest of the globe. And I think, I've been doing some work with individuals behind the scenes and trying to really pull together different conversations around how do we actually create that international global standard. And as I mentioned earlier, I've been, discussing with Equitable Origin and ISO, the ISO standards group as well. And there's ways that we can actually pull together that information and really set ourselves up here in BC and Canada in general as a global leader. So I think, there's innovation in a number of different ways, and we are ahead of the game here. So we need to take advantage of our advantage. You know what I mean?
I think that's well said. It feels like a tagline to me. I like that. Pat, over to you. Really interesting from a regulatory point of view. You're already doing so many things, but I think there's huge opportunity to be able to position our regulatory system to accept projects, get them through to final investment decisions in ways that we can take advantage of this opportunity that I think we're talking about for our sector.
Yeah, I would say that when people think of a regulator, they don't often think innovation, right? But I can assure people that we are very much committed to that. We understand our role in the broader system. We're very much, as an organization, committed to continuous improvement. And whether that means ongoing education, training for our people in the system to make sure that they're up to date with the cutting edge. We're doing things like looking to automate sort of very basic applications to speed up that process, as opposed to having, to print things out and put pen to paper. So we're doing things like that. I mentioned before some of the work we're doing to make the data that we hold more accessible. We were formerly the NEV, and so have 60 years of energy data that we hold in PDFs and binders. And we're in the process of putting that online and making it accessible to people, so everyone, industry, stakeholders, communities, can see that information and help them with their applications, with their interventions, with the questions that they want to ask. We're also looking at things like, we understand the role of innovation in the industry. Obviously, it's key and very important. So what is the role of the regulator in that? At a minimum, it's to not obstruct that innovation, right? And at a positive, it's to actually enable it. So as we look to this transition to a low carbon economy, how can we as a regulator help to drive that innovation? How can we work with industry? And I think one of the many opportunities we'll have is we're currently doing a review of our onshore pipeline regulations. And so that's an opportunity for us to take a look. And this is a regular cyclical review. But given the current state of the industry and the trends that we're watching, where do we see that industry going? And how can we incent and enable that innovation from a regulatory perspective? Because people often think of us as, adjudicators on major projects, which we absolutely are, but we're a life cycle regulator. And I think there's tons of innovation to be had on existing pieces of infrastructure that have a very long lifetime left in them. So how can we work together with industry and other stakeholders to incorporate that from a regulatory perspective? And I'm actually really excited about that piece as we move towards economic recovery and looking at how we can incent this innovation and really enable that recovery.
Thank you, Gitane. Tim, interested in your thoughts. I'll share my little story about where I live is Surrey. The organic waste gets picked up by a natural gas collection truck, taken down to the center. The method, turned into renewable natural gas, which is put into the system and fuels the truck. We've got this closed loop cycle that's just fantastic that no one thinks about. And you think about that as an innovation. That's just one of them, from our shared member like Fortis BC. But there's literally, dozens and dozens of innovations occurring every day within the sector. So interested in your thoughts on where we're at and what we can do to let people know about them more and again do more.
Well, you're right, Bryan. There are, and it's a great example, and that's the kind of work that's being done across the country on renewable natural gas. And I think what's key about it is that it's seamless. So the change by which we've incorporated renewable natural gas into the gas delivery system has been seamless, and it's because of the innovative technologies that are at play day to day, so that the customer doesn't even know there's a different source of that molecule. And I think that, again, speaks to the innovation within the industry. I agree with what my colleague said. I want to underscore Gitane's point about data. We have a wealth of data about the Canadian story, but to pick up on Donna's point, we haven't been necessarily very good at telling our story. And, I was in an international session a couple months ago, and they put up a map of methane emissions around the world and hotspots for methane emissions around the world. And the globe was dark, and then there were lights where there were hotspots. And honestly, there was virtually nothing on Canada. And there were glaring hotspots around the world. And it's like, this is not the story that people understand domestically. People think that there are significant problems and that Canada is a source of those problems. And the reality is quite the opposite. But we are trying to drive to constantly improve that, as Mike noted. We're not standing still. We are driving innovation through investment in technology companies in areas like renewable natural gas that you mentioned, Bryan, in hydrogen, in energy efficiency, in methane recovery, in carbon capture, in electric gas integration, which is increasingly key as more and more governments talk about objectives around electrification. Our point is, why would you look at picking one technology over another? Why wouldn't you try to combine your energy systems and be more efficient in the delivery overall? And that kind of innovation work is constantly at play. The challenge, I think, is to broadcast the kind of innovation we're doing. And I'll go on for one more minute about this. So when we started the Natural Gas Innovation Fund, the first reaction of many was that there's not much innovation opportunity in the natural gas industry that people don't already know about. But we started doing open calls for ideas. And sure enough, professors from engineering schools and other schools at universities across the country started contacting us and saying, hey, I've got an idea to develop something. Is this something you could support? And the reality is that we hadn't done that for several decades. And now we're getting literally dozens and dozens of ideas every time we go out for another call. And as I noted, we've invested in over 50 technology innovation companies. So I think the opportunity is a huge one.
Great. Thank you, Tim. I'm just noting we're getting down to time, so we probably have time for one more question and a closing remark. So I'll fold it into one. We'll go to the Who've app, and I wanted to deal with the first one first, because as the moderator, I'm going to take the prerogative to answer it, because I'm previously the CEO of the Mining Association of BC, so I could talk about LNG and mining, and the answer is both and all. And I think I encourage you to go look at the One Province, One Economy study that the Mining Association of BC has done to show the depth and breadth of the supply chain in every single community in British Columbia. And again, look at the Conference Board of Canada reports just showing that 96,000 jobs can be created across this nation from developing the LNG industry. It's both, and those supply chains are interconnected across our industries. So really that's what I always take from this conference is we're totally connected. The second question there, I think we've really answered it, and it's a really good one around the BC brand and expanded on it. So the one I really want to go to is around is that third one there around all the change we're seeing in the world. Obviously, we've got a new administration in the United States where we're seeing investment changes throughout the world. It's a very uncertain time right now. So I'd be interested in your thoughts. We've got about maybe a minute and a half each to give your thoughts on that, on where we can play in that, and also a closing comment, and then we'll need to close out the conference. So Tim, maybe I'll start with you, and then to Donna, Mike, Gitane, and then we'll close things off.
Well, if I understand the question, what can we do to become more self-reliant in our energy needs? The reality is that we are self-reliant. I mean, Canada is extraordinarily energy independent. We're blessed with phenomenal resources in energy like we are in so many other areas. So we've been an exporter of energy resources for a very, very long time. And it's been a huge asset for our country and a huge source of well-being for Canadians. So when we look at protectionist policies that are being suggested either in the U.S. or elsewhere, that's worrying. It's worrying because it poses a threat, and I think we want to make the point that the opportunity that we offer for countries around the world with our energy resources is one that is going to improve their well-being. We don't want to see that opportunity restricted by any kind of protectionist policies. We want to see it opened up because we have an opportunity to improve the lives of citizens around the world, much as we have in Canada. And that's kind of my closing comment. Again, Bryan, is just to underscore the point that we've delivered enormous benefit to Canadians, and we continue to do so. I once had a meeting with a minister who said to me, "Why am I meeting with you? You're not a problem. I've got problems." And his point was that gas is delivered seamlessly. It's that there are very rare to see reliability issues around it. It's affordable. People are happy with it. They don't think about it. And I think we take advantage of that by criticizing the industry, and we don't realize just how extraordinary the benefit consumers are getting right now. And it's incumbent on all of us to talk to those as much as we can in order to both improve the performance of our industry now, but also to take it around the world.
Thank you, Tim. And I think that's really the question, the final question, the closing comments is, what can we do to take advantage of right now? An uncertain time, but a really strong position that we have with ESG metrics and all of our opportunities here in Canada. So here, Mike, over to you for some quick comments, really about a minute and a half.
Sure, I kind of touched on it during my introductory remarks, but when you look at Canada, when you look at BC, we have with the Montney, and I saw the question on there about the Liard Basin. I mean, I think that can be developed at some point a little further down because it's higher up the cost curve. But BC's blessed with probably the best LNG subsurface resource, and our collective industry, when I say we on the gas side, we are the best at developing it from a cost standpoint and from an emission standpoint. Donna's absolutely right. We're all working harder on telling our story better. In some cases, that requires other people telling our story, not us. And we and our industry are working hard to that end as well. But Canada needs to take advantage of its greatest strengths right now as we, build our economic and our economy back up. And as we do that with LNG on the West Coast, and I can't tell you, Bryan, how excited I am about your project. We had a crack at this 10 to 15 years ago. Various circumstances didn't have that happen. And of course, now it's on the US Gulf Coast, and they've got a 10 BCF a day industry taking full advantage of that. We need to get that on our West Coast. It gives our country, our provinces, much more revenue for healthcare, for education, and generating more funds for our continuing innovation and technology development. And that's the Canadian way. We're the best, and we're going to get better.
Well said, Mike. Donna, over to you for some closing comments.
Sure, thanks very much. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to be on this panel today. So thank you for that invitation again. A couple things. I guess I just want to reemphasize that natural gas has a very critical role to play here in the entire climate solution, be it on the hydrogen strategy side, which we're seeing federally and provincially as well. We can't forget that the natural gas has a critical role to play there if we want to accomplish those targets. The other area I've spoken a lot about, so I don't want to be too repetitive, but talking about BC brand and how we can be a leader globally is really an area I think a lot of us need to focus on and provide those proof points and help the government with that, telling that story as well, so that we can work collaboratively with government to ensure that our natural gas industry is going strong and supporting the economy of BC. There's also a role for stakeholders to play in this. When we look at ESG, the movement initially started with G, probably over a decade ago on the governance side, and you saw organizations like the proxy managers and the CCGG, the Canadian Council for Good Governance, organizations like that evolved. And then you saw the movement into the E side of things, which is really the environmental drive on the emission reduction piece. And however, that's extremely important. We need to see the movement through the S and look at the entire framework for ESG and not just focus narrowly on the emissions piece. I think it's really critical that we pick up on the Indigenous focus within the S, and that's where Indigenous people can see how they play a role and fit in with that broader ESG framework. So if I would just urge people as stakeholders to think about it from a broader lens, and I think we'd all be better served. So thank you.
Thank you, Donna. And Gitane, just a quick minute if you can for closing comments. Thank you.
I have so much I'd like to say in my last minute and a half. I can't let a comment on protectionism go. Having served for almost 15 years in the Foreign Service as a Canada-US specialist, I will tell people this is not new. It has been around for years. It is certainly increasing in prominence, and it is only natural, I think, in the age of a global pandemic when people are worried about scarcity, that they start to look to what they can produce within their own borders and what they're willing to share. But Canada is a trading nation. We have far more resources than we will ever consume ourselves. And so it's incredibly important that Canada continue to engage in these multilateral conversations to maintain that space and maintain all of the gains that were made on the global trade front to allow us to continue access to those international markets, which are so crucial for us as a country. As a regulator, I would say that a continued focus on reconciliation is really key. It matters to me as a person. It matters to us as a country. It's important to the sector. It's long past due. And I think to the comment about the S, it's also crucial there as well. So many reasons for us to continue to meaningfully engage on this journey to reconciliation and make a commitment to the Indigenous peoples to do better and to work together going forward in partnership. So thank you again for the opportunity to join this panel.
Thank you, Gitane, and thank you to the four of you. This has been a really excellent panel, and I know if folks have been watching it, they've learned a lot, and I think there's a lot to be proud of what each of you are doing to contribute right now. And so thank you, and also thank you for keeping us on time because, of course, the Premier's coming right up, and I think we're all going to be interested in what the Premier has to say. And I think about that BC brand. This is really an opportunity, I think, for BC to be a nation builder, to play a leading role within Canada. And it's a really exciting time for British Columbia with the natural resource assets that we have, the innovation and the opportunities like LNG, which I'm so proud to represent, and all of the work that you do. This is really our time. And the timing is right to make this happen. And so again, thank you for coming and speaking at this conference, for taking the time. It's been a real pleasure for me. And thank you to C3 and all the organizers for putting this on. We've kept to time, and thank you very much. Have a great day. Stay safe and healthy, everyone, and take care.
Thanks, Bryan.
Thank you, Bryan and panelists, for participating in this morning's session. If you want to talk to Bryan and some of the panelists, please check in the sub-session during the next refreshment break to reconnect with the panelists. Now, I'd like you to connect back to the agenda and select the next session to view the keynote from Premier John Horgan. We'll see you in a couple of minutes.